All right, we're going to be taking a look at how to solve polynomial equations. So in many cases, polynomials, sometimes they could be quadratics, or they could be linear, or sometimes cubic functions. So in this particular case, we have a quadratic function that we're going to get to solve. The first thing before we do anything is I like to point out how many solutions we should be looking for. And a lot of times, or every time, you should be able to tell how many solutions you'll find by looking at the power of your function or of your polynomial. If it's a power of 2, you should anticipate 2 roots or 2 solutions. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I want to isolate y squared. All right, so what we can do is subtract the 13 from both sides. So now that we have y squared isolated, we have y squared is equal to negative 13. We then want to get y by itself, so we would need to get rid of the power of 2. One of the ways in which we can get rid of that power of 2 is to take the square root, and by square rooting both sides, we will be able to essentially cancel out the square with the square root on the left side. These are inverse operations of each other, so what we are left with is just y. Now, because we are supposed to end up with 2 solutions, whenever you take square root or you apply the square root, you need to use the plus or minus on the other side of the equation. So what we end up with here is the plus or minus square root of negative 13. Okay, now this is where the 2 solutions are visible. We can split this up and say y is equal to 1 positive root 13 and the other y equal to the negative root of negative 13. Now, one last thing before we finish is that if you're familiar with anytime you have the square root of a negative value, this becomes I, okay? So we're gonna apply what we know and we're gonna turn the square root of negative 13 into 13i, okay, 13i. So this is y equal to the positive of square root of 13i and y is equal to the negative square root of 13i, okay? So these would be our 2 solutions. I is technically on the outside of the square root, okay? So just keep that, be aware of that. Let me close the square root of where I is on the outside. So if you were to type it into IXL, make sure that you close your square root and then I is on the outside of that square root. So these would be our 2 solutions.